Hello everyone, today we talk about our beloved Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II family of single-seat, single-engine supersonic stealth. If we really have to start from the ABC, because we haven't really made a lot of aerial warfare content, but it's frankly some of my favorite, and I expect, at least as a medievalist as a matter of fact. So the very low observable to radar, reducing detectability by enemy sensors through specialized shaping materials and coatings, multi-role strike fighters, representing the culmination of more than 2 decades of systematic U.S. Department of Defense, so the Federal Executive Department responsible for coordinating and supervising all agencies and functions of the government relating to national security of the United States Armed Forces efforts to rationalize the fragmented service-specific requirements into a united platform family that embeds fifth-generation attributes, including very low observable, as we said before, the LO stealth, advanced sensor fusion, the process essentially of integrating data from multiple sensors to produce more accurate, reliable, and comprehensive situational awareness than any single sensor could provide, network-centric connectivity, and super cruise potential in some regimes across air dominance, precision strike, electronic warfare, and multi-sensor reconnaissance capabilities. The conceptual foundations were laid in the mid to late 1980s as intelligence assessments increasingly highlighted the vulnerability of existing tactical aircraft to evolving Soviet capabilities that were admittedly not particularly impressive. And in fact, the Soviet Union was really losing the war. I made a recent video about Reagan, Thatcher, Wojtyla, explaining, especially for the American president's section, how essentially, this is also notorious in general, like the Soviets couldn't match any of the quality. They collapsed basically for the impossibility of the strategic sustainability with NATO, the United States even just in particular. Integrated air defense networks had grown denser at the time with overlapping medium and long-range surface-to-air missile systems, mobile short-range systems, and command and controlling integration that dramatically compressed reaction times for penetrating aircraft. By the way, we'll surely make a video about air-land battle, right? NATO's doctrine regarding the entire sort of aerial role in what would have been effectively, especially the major confrontation in the European continent in case of World War. Now, the appearance of the Beriev A-50 mainstay, which first flew in 1978 and entered Soviet service in 1985, that was the moment of crisis, like for a while, up to 1983. 1983 was a bad year, really. 1984, the Soviets had bridged some gaps with the West, and this was also in view of their quinquennial plans, etc., like the useful moment to launch like what could be, again, a competitive, conventional attack to the West. And from there on, things started, in any case, going downhill for good. And that particular aircraft first flew, therefore, at the end of the 70s, and entered in service in the mid-80s, providing extended airborne detection ranges through its rotodome radar mounted on an Ilyushin, in fact, IL-76 airframe. Airborne early warning and control platform extended detection envelopes far beyond ground-based radars. Because of this, while the simultaneous fielding of the Sukhoi Su-27 flanker, which first flew in 1977, and entered in service also in 1985, featuring advanced super maneuverability, powerful engines enabling thrust-weight ratios near or above 1, and long-range look-down/shoot-down radar, as well as Mikoyan MiG-29 Fulcrum. They're all very famous aircraft, and this also first flew at the end of the 70s, entered in service in 1983, and this was designed as a lightweight, agile fighter with helmet-mounted cooling, off-board side missiles, and strong close combat performance. I mean, to us now, it sounds all pretty archaic, you know. primitive. But these developments collectively signaled that fourth-generation aircraft relying on speed, maneuverability, and external stores would face prohibitive attrition rates in future high-threat environments unless radical reductions in observability could be achieved alongside sustained supersonic performance. One of the earliest structured responses was the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the DARPA, the Research and Development Agency of the United States Department of Defense, responsible for developing emerging technologies for use by the military. Advanced Short Takeoff/Vertical Landing, the ASTOVL, a program focused on technologies enabling supersonic aircraft to perform short takeoffs and vertical landings, which began in 1983 as a US-UK collaborative effort under DARPA management to explore, in fact, the supersonic STOVL replacements for the Harrier. And this ran through phases of concept exploration and risk reduction until its merger into broader efforts in the mid-1990s, where, of course, the world strategic situation had quite changed, but underscoring the correctness of previous insight for the development of a fifth-generation project that could largely dominate, especially over sort of uncompetitive antagonists. The program, which operated continuously from 1983 to 1994 and whose primary objective was to define propulsion, airframe, and control technologies for a supersonic aircraft that could supplant the subsonic McDonnell Douglas AV-8B Harrier II. This was a single, as you know, engine ground attack aircraft capable of vertical/short takeoff and landing through vector thrust from its Pegasus engine. The Harrier family, while revolutionary, naturally in its time, for enabling dispersed operations from amphibious assault ships, expeditionary airfields, and damaged runways, obviously with the reduction in airstrip runway that vertical takeoff and landing entailed, suffered, however, from a combat radius typically limited to 150 to 200 nautical miles on internal fuel. Payload fractions constrained by the weight and volume penalties of the Pegasus vector thrust turbofan, a high bypass turbofan engine with 4 rotatable nozzles to direct thrust for V/STOL operations, and maximum speeds barely exceeding Mach 0.9. That is approximately 690 miles per hour, 1110 kilometers per hour at sea level, in level flight naturally, even when lightly loaded. ASTOVL therefore pursued a design that retained vertical/short takeoff and landing flexibility while achieving sustained supersonic dash, substantially greater range on internal fuel, meaningful low observable signatures, and compatibility with conventional runway operations for Allied air forces. The program rigorously compared 4 principal lift concepts for the critical hover and transition phases. Direct lift, in which the main engine exhaust was fully vectored downward through swiveling nozzles or rotating cascades. A lift plus lift/cruise, which paired a dedicated auxiliary lift engine with vector thrust from the propulsion engine, gas-driven remote fan arrangements that ducted compressor bleed air to separate lift fans or ejector pumps, and shaft-driven lift fan systems that essentially mechanically transferred low-pressure turbine power via clutch and drive shaft to a forward fan that produced cold high-mass flow vertical thrust to counterbalance the hot core exhaust and minimize hot gas reingestion. Under a classified workstream within STOVL, designated the Supersonic STOVL fighter, Lockheed's Skunk Works is essentially Lockheed Martin's Advanced Development Programs Division, renowned for secretive, quote-unquote, black projects like the U-2, the SR-71, the F-117, explored a low observable single-engine configuration built around a Canard Delta platform with an empty weight target near 24,000 pounds. The design placed deliberate emphasis on integrating the shaft-driven lift fan concept, which promised efficient vertical lift, without compromising the aircraft's high-speed aerodynamic profile, internal weapons volume or fuel fraction, while avoiding the hot gas ingestion and ground erosion issues associated with direct exhaust vectoring. Simultaneously, as we've seen, the abrupt end of the Cold War, because again, this had started in the early 80s, and the Soviet Union's collapse in December 1991 triggered immediate and deep reductions, as we all know, not just in the US, but the broader Western defense expenditure that forced cancellation or severe curtailment of several parallel fighter modernization efforts. Right? That's always Clausewitzly the political push that brings that amount of investment. The Air Force's multi-role fighter, the MRF, proposed lightweight, affordable successor to the F-16 with enhanced multi-role capabilities program, originally framed as an affordable, lightweight successor, in fact, for the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon, a single-engine multi-role fighter known, most famously for its versatility, low cost, and widespread export success, was gradually de-scoped and canceled. As, again, post-Cold War force structural revisions extended F-16 service life through reduced sortie rates, depot-level upgrades, and lower operational tempos, while funding priorities shifted decisively toward the Lockheed Martin F-22 Advanced Tactical Fighter. Now the F-22 Raptor, that you see also here and there in pictures here, a twin-engine air superiority fighter, emphasizing stealth, supercruise, and supermaneuverability as the primary counter to emerging Russian and Chinese air superiority threats. In parallel, the Navy's Advanced Attack/Fighter program initially began in 1991 as the Advanced Attack, the AAX, effort to develop a successor to the Grumman A-6 Intruder, a carrier-based all-weather attack aircraft, and later restructured as A/FX to incorporate additional air superiority roles following cancellation of the Naval Advanced Tactical Fighter variant of the F-22, was terminated after the McDonnell Douglas A-12 Avenger II succumbed in January 1991 to intractable weight growth, technical immaturity in its composite wing and stealth shaping, and cost overruns that exceeded original estimates by several $billion, by the way. So this was due to its flying wing design, composite materials, and stealth features that basically were compounded, like the severe weight growth that compromised performance, and this primarily also to its massive cost overruns exceeding, as we've seen, billions of dollars. Residual engineering data, aerodynamic databases, avionic concepts, propulsion, integration studies, and systems integration experience from both canceled programs were deliberately preserved and redirected into the Joint Advanced Strike Technology, the JAST, right? Initially formally constituted in 1993, following the same-year bottom-up review recommendations to mature technologies and defined requirements for affordable next-generation strike systems, merging prior efforts into a technology-focused initiative that preceded full aircraft development, right? And JAST was deliberately structured not as an immediate aircraft acquisition program, but as a requirements definition and technology maturation vehicle. It focused on establishing future strike warfighting needs, advancing low observable airframe shaping through computational fluid dynamics and radar cross-section prediction tools, fusing disparate sensor data streams into coherent battle space pictures via high-speed data buses and common integrated processors, maturing lightweight high-strength composites, advanced titanium alloys, and bismuth limite resins, demonstrating scalable propulsion architectures that could deliver both high dry thrust for subsonic cruise efficiency And after burning thrust for supersonic dash without prohibited specific fuel consumption or thermal signature penalties. So speed, yes, without sort of running out of energy too soon, and also not leaving much of a trail for the enemy to intercept. The decisive convergence occurred in 1994 when the ASTOVL/Common Affordable Lightweight Fighter Activity, the 1993 rebranding of the original ASTOVL program, was formally incorporated into the broader JAST structure. The march forward continued under the JST banner until 1995, when it was officially renamed the Joint Strike Fighter, JSF, the program to develop a family of multi-role stealth fighters with high commonality across US services and allies. The central ambition was to create a tightly integrated family of aircraft that maximized structural, systems level, and logistical commonality. Early planning documents targeted 70 to 80% parts overlap across configurations to replace an expansive array of legacy platforms then approaching obsolescence. For the Air Force, the principal targets were the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon and Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, the most famous close air support aircraft armed with a 30mm GAU-8 cannon, the Warthog. For the Navy, the McDonnell Douglas F/A-18 Hornet family, so that, as was in the carrier, capable multi-role fighter/attack aircraft, and residual A-6 intruder derivatives. And for the Marine Corps, the AV-8B Harrier II alongside aging F/A-18A/C/D models. The design philosophy explicitly anticipated substantial export demand from close allies modernizing their tactical aviation forces, and incorporated modular interfaces that would facilitate future technology insertion without requiring complete airframe redesign, thereby extending economic service life and reducing life cycle ownership costs. International engagement became a structural feature of the program almost from its formal inception. The United Kingdom maintained continuous involvement in ASTOVL from its launch and secured exclusive Tier 1 partner status in 1995, contributing approximately 10% of projected development expenditure while accepting responsibility for significant airframe subsections, principally the rear fuselage assemblies, together with the Martin Baker US-16E ejection seat, a 0-0 rocket-assisted ejection system, active interceptors, laser targeting designators, and weapon release sequencing hardware supplied primarily through BAE facilities in the United Kingdom. Italy and the Netherlands entered as Tier 2 partners during the concept demonstration phase, committing financial resources and industrial work share that granted them preferential access to technology transfer, production subcontracts, and final assembly and checkout facilities in Cameri, Italy. Australia, Canada, Denmark, Norway, and initially Turkey joined as Tier 3 participants, contributing funding at lower levels while securing priority positions on the production delivery queue and opportunities for domestic industry participation in component manufacturing. Israel and Singapore subsequently participated as security cooperative participants, enabling tailored modifications and selective technology integration under bilateral security arrangements. Later sales to non-partner nations including Belgium, Japan, and South Korea proceeded through the established Foreign Military Sales, the FMS, the U.S. government program for selling defense articles and services to foreign governments, framework administered by the Department of Defense. Turkey's involvement ceased in July 2019 after its acquisition of the Russian S-400, a long-range surface-to-air missile system capable of engaging aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, triggered statutory security restrictions under U.S. law, resulting in the removal of Turkish aircraft from the production sequence and their reallocation to the U.S. inventory. In early 1997, the Department of Defense executed a formal down select authorizing Boeing and Lockheed Martin to proceed with concept demonstrator aircraft under fixed funding ceilings designed to enforce cost discipline and prevent either contractor from outspending the other into insolvency. Boeing's X-32 pursued a direct lift philosophy in which the main engine exhaust could be fully redirected downward through vectored nozzles during short takeoff and vertical landing operations, relying on a large chin inlet and a delta wing configuration that prioritized simplicity and parts commonality. Lockheed Martin's X-35 integrated the shaft-driven lift fan system originally patented during ASTOVL investigations, allowing efficient vertical thrust generation while preserving extensive aerodynamic commonality across variants by substituting the forward fan module with additional internal fuel volume for the conventional takeoff and landing configuration, or with a two-dimensional thrust vectoring nozzle for enhancing pitch control and post-stall maneuverability. The X-35 design further reduced carrier landing risk by adopting a conventional tail arrangement rather than the canard delta layout previously examined under ASTOVL, thereby lowering approach angles and sink rate demands during arrested landings. The X-35A conventional takeoff and landing, the STOL conventional takeoff and landing prototype, completed its first flight on October the 24th, 2000, was subsequently modified into the X-35B short takeoff and vertical landing, the STOVL configuration, where it successfully demonstrated stable hovers, controlled vertical landings with a 500-foot ground roll, short takeoffs, and conversions between hover and wing-borne flight, and the enlarged wing X-35C carrier variant, CV, also known as CATOBIR for catapult-assisted takeoffs but arrested recovery, achieving first flight on December the 16th, 2000, validating compatibility with catapult-assisted takeoffs, arrested recoveries, and catapult launch dynamics. On October the 26th, 2001, the Department of Defense awarded Lockheed Martin the System Development and Demonstration, the SDD phase, following concept demonstration where the selected design undergoes detailed engineering, testing, and risk reduction prior to full production. This contract followed head-to-head evaluation of the two demonstrators. The designation F-35 Lightning II was assigned immediately by Program Manager Major General Mike Howe. Pratt & Whitney received parallel responsibility for the F-135 afterburning turbofan family as a derivative of the F-119 engine, powering the F-22, providing 43,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner. The resulting aircraft family standardized three principal variants constructed around a shared core structure, a common avionics backbone, and unified propulsion architecture. The F-35A, configured for conventional runway operations with a maximum load factor of plus 9.0 G, the Air Force's primary multi-role variant with internal 25mm cannon. The F-35B equipped with the Rolls-Royce lift system, a shaft-driven lift fan plus vector main engine nozzle for short takeoff and vertical landing used by the Marine Corps and allies, with a maximum load factor of plus 7 Gs, and the F-35C optimized for catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery aboard carriers through enlarged wing surfaces, increased span-folding wingtips, and strengthened landing gear capable of repeated high-sink rate arrested landings with a maximum load factor of plus 7.5 Gs. The airframe architecture drew extensively on lessons accumulated during the F-22 development, integrating composites that constitute 35% of structural weight, predominantly bismuth-lamide and epoxy resin systems, and diverterless supersonic inlets, the DSI, that utilize compression bumps to divert boundary layer flow without traditional splitter plates or bleed doors, thereby eliminating radar reflective cavities and reducing overall signature. Low observable performance receives primary emphasis against X-band radar frequencies, typically from 8 to 12 GHz, the primary band for fire control radars. Through meticulous edge alignment, continuous surface curvature, application of radar absorbent materials backed into the fiber mat skin for improved durability and reduced maintenance, and strict internal carriage of all ordnance to eliminate parasitic drag and scattering from external pylons. The DAS, the Distributed Aperture System, delivers continuous 360-degree infrared coverage for missile launch detection, infrared search and track functionality, night vision imagery, and spherical situational awareness imagery fed directly to the helmet-mounted display visor. You see also from the pictures, it's quite elaborated to say the least, enabling this so-called look-through capability and high off-bore side queuing. The AN/APG-81 active electronically scanned array radar supports concurrent air-to-air search track while scan against multiple targets at ranges exceeding 80 nautical miles, synthetic aperture ground mapping, ground moving target indication and track, and electronic attack modes including narrowband jamming. An electronically scanned array radar by Northrop Grumman. Sensor fusion processing merges returns from radar, infrared, and electronic support measures into a single coherent tactical picture rendered on a 20 by 8 inch panoramic touchscreen and projected onto the visor of the helmet-mounted display system, reducing pilot workload and enabling network-centric operations through the multifunction advanced data link, the MADL, in fact, the directional high data rate, low probability of intercept data link for secure sharing of sensor and targeting information among F-35s and other platforms. In fact, if you look at the cockpit instrumentation, you may think that it's all very sort of simple, Spartan, almost like a toy. However, much of the data is actually transferred through the visor. Initial low-rate initial production, the LRIP, lots quickly exposed a range of persistent engineering and integration difficulties that required sustained corrective action across multiple redesign cycles. Right, this is the low-rate initial production, the early phase of manufacturing to build limited quantities for testing and initial fielding. The F-35B variant suffered premature fatigue cracking in primary airframe bulkheads and horizontal tails due to high temperature afterburner exposure and dynamic loads during hover, necessitating comprehensive structural reinforcement, material substitution, and localized redesign. The F-35C carrier arrestor hook assembly underwent multiple revisions after consistently failing to engage arresting wires reliably during initial landing evaluations at Lakehurst and aboard USS Nimitz. As you know, giving the name to the entire, in fact, Nimitz class supercarrier, requiring a complete redesign of the hook, shank, damper, and attachment structure. Fuel tank vulnerability to lightning strike required additional protective measures, including conductive coatings and surge suppressors, helmet-mounted display systems exhibiting vibration-induced jitter, and dynamic alignment errors that degraded night vision and targeting symbology, and software integration demanding more than 8 million lines of code written predominantly in C and C++ with legacy ADA components from the F-22, producing repeated schedule slippage due to the unprecedented scale, interdependence, and complexity of the mission systems code base. The programmatic decision to initiate low-rate initial production prior to completing developmental flight testing, widely referred to as concurrency, compelled extensive retrofits across early production airframes and elicited sharp criticism from senior Department of Defense acquisition officials who characterized the approach as acquisition malpractice in congressional testimony and internal reviews. Notwithstanding these sustained challenges, the first F-35A prototype, serial AA-1, rolled out in February 2006 and accomplished its maiden flight on December the 15th of the same year with Chief Test Pilot John S. Beasley at the controls. The United States Marine Corps declared initial operational capability, the IOC, the first attainment of the capability to employ the system in its intended operational environment for the F-35B in July 2015, employing Block 2B software, an early combat-capable software release providing limited air-to-air and air-to-ground functions under limited night and adverse weather conditions. The United States Air Force followed with F-35A initial operational capability in August 2016 under the Block 3I configuration, which retained Block 2B combat capability while introducing technology refresh to hardware upgrades, including improved core processors and displays. The United States Navy certified F-35C initial operational capability in February 2019 under the full Block 3F baseline, the final software configuration for the system development and demonstration phase, providing full warfighting capability, including expanded fight envelope and baseline weapons integration. In the complete suite essentially of baseline weapons, including the AIM-120D, AMR-AAM. This is as you know, an advanced medium-range air-to-air missile with active radar homing, and GBU-39 small-diameter bomb. This is a 250-pound precision-guided glide bomb for internal carriage, and finalized mission systems maturity. Formal operational test and evaluation of the definitive Block 3F configuration concluded in late 2023 after protracted integration difficulties with the Department of Defense Joint Simulation Environment. This is high-fidelity modeling and simulation system for testing, essentially, and were resolved as such, allowing closure of the same system development and demonstration phase in March 2024. All right. The aircraft achieved its first combat employment on May 22, 2018, when Israeli Air Force F-35IS, this is the, as we've seen before, the Israel's customized F-35 variant, designated ADIR, incorporating indigenous electronic warfare systems and weapons integration with electronic warfare system sensors, interfaces, selective internal weapon compatibility, all kind of stuff, conducting precision strikes against Iranian-linked positions surrounding Damascus and the Golan Heights buffer zone in Syria, marking the world's first operational use of the F-35 in combat during clashes involving Iranian forces in Syria, proxies, etc. The type subsequently accumulated broad operational experience across multiple theaters. United States forces employed the F-35s for close air support, suppression of enemy air defenses, and intelligence/surveillance collection in Afghanistan, where the inaugural strike was executed on September 27, 2018, from the amphibious assault ship USS Essex, a Wasp-class assault ship, Iraq, Syria, including destruction of Islamic State tunnel networks in northern Iraq in April 2019, and kinetic engagement of Wagner Group positions near Qashm in February 2018, interestingly enough, Yemen, and Venezuela in January 2026 strikes alongside F-22s, B-1s, F/A-18s, and other assets. Naturally, consider that these videos are very rare. Talking about the 21st century is not really exactly the main reason why I'm here. I have different followers asking me to cover, for example, now Iran. And Schwerpunkt can sort of step up as some sort of broader strategic analysis channel, right? What we're generally speaking discussing, but it's important in any case to focus not on the novelty per se, but on, in fact, strategic analysis, the military historical method, and so on. So that's why history in general is important. Like studying the past is not sort of remaining back to the present and not understanding that, but on the contrary, it's an extra gear for the understanding of the same. Besides, again, I'm preparing something here and there, and even this video cursorily hints at some of what's going on. At the end of the video, we'll also talk a bit more about the whole situation. Israeli F-35Is conducted repeated deep penetration operations over Gaza during Operation Guardian of the Walls in May 2021. Sustained campaigns over Lebanon and Yemen, strikes against Iranian missile shipments transiting Iraq. Long-range missions over Iranian territory in 2024-2025 that necessitated conformal fuel tanks to achieve required unrefueled combat radius without aerial refueling. An extensive involvement in major 2025 campaigns like Operation Rising Lion, striking over 1,000 miles into Iran against nuclear facilities, ballistic missile infrastructure, and military leadership, with more than 1,400 sorties flown without manned aircraft losses, as well as renewed 2026 operations such as the ongoing one Epic Fury involving joint US-Israeli strikes on Iranian targets. Right. In fact, what we've seen last June was in many ways largely, if not propedeutic, obviously functional to what is currently going on. Right. I also have a video, by the way, about Iranian armed forces from 2022. So if you're interested, at least where they were at the time, more or less, not anymore where they are today because they've been, obliterated. But let's say, again, I will discuss these things in a separated video. But remember that, again, the F-35 shown in these circumstances. Royal Air Force and Royal Navy F-35Bs participated in precision strikes against Islamic State residual elements in Iraq and Syria commencing in 2019, with aircraft recently embarked aboard HMS Queen Elizabeth. This is also the name bearer for the homonymous class aircraft carrier for power projection missions in the Mediterranean and Indo-Pacific regions, and defensive operations in the Middle East in 2026, including countering Iranian drones now, and missiles following US-Israeli strikes on Iran. If you're interested also in British Armed Forces, I also made a video about them in 2022. I really want to restart a bit the cycle. We have to cover all of the West at least, and of course we can expand profitably in other militaries as already done with Iran. As you know, I have sadly ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine series that has yielded quite some attention, for which I'm grateful. Sort of thanks for the trust, so to say, the interest. Now, as of early 2026, the worldwide fleet of F-35s surpasses 1,300 delivered aircraft, reaching approximately 1,300 units across all variants and international customers, following Lockheed Martin's record output of 191 airframes in calendar year 2025 alone. The United States maintains a program of record encompassing 1,763 F-35As for the Air Force, 353 F-35Bs, and 67 F-35Cs for the Marine Corps, and 273 F-35Cs for the Navy, yielding a total procurement objective of 2,456 airframes through 2044. The aircraft constitutes the foundational element of United States crewed tactical aviation and occupies a central position in NATO, obviously enough. And we don't need now to descend on the magnitude of American power, and thus also sort of the crucial relevance within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its sort of 32 member states. This is true also for allied air power architectures in general, so for the remainder of the military alliance, with structural design life expectations, by the way, extending to 2070, under continuous modernization. However, ongoing Block 4 capability enhancements, the major follow-on modernization program, introducing new sensors, weapons, and processing upgrades through agile development, introduce, in fact, the AN/APG-85 active electronically scanned RI radar, compatible with all three variants, broadened internal and external weapon carriage options encompassing the AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile. This is a long-range air-to-air missile successor to the AARGM-ER. Kongsberg Joint Strike Missile is instead the stealthy anti-ship and land attack cruise missile. The MBDA Spear 3 is a network-enabled precision-guided mini-cruise missile. AGM-88G AARGM-ER, an extended-range anti-radiation missile for suppression of enemy air defenses, and prospective hypersonic munitions. Augmented electronic support measures bandwidth for enhanced threat geolocation and jamming, and technology refreshed 3 Avionics hardware featuring significantly increased core processing throughput, expanded memory capacity, and higher resolution cockpit displays. These incremental improvements, underpinned by agile software development methodologies that enable rapid iteration and fielding of capability packages without traditional multi-year block cycles, are structured to preserve operational dominance against maturing peer-level threats across air superiority engagements, deep interdiction of strategic targets, suppression of integrated enemy air defense networks, electronic warfare operations, and persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance collection in gradually contested multi-domain environments characterized by advanced long-range surface-to-air systems, proliferating fifth-generation fighters, layered counter-stealth detection architectures, and increasingly sophisticated electronic attack capabilities. I was glad to introduce the beloved F-35 that was sort of attacked even journalistically for political reasons. Only some journalists, for that matter, of course, for the wrong reasons. It costs too much. We don't need a new military force. We don't need to spend for wars, and you're well served. Obviously, lesser people are always aligned with populistic anti-imperial nonsense, and definitely the F-35 as a shatter of such people around the world is exactly what we need to, not to make them understand, but simply to cancel them from the face of the earth. And it's never like quite the optimal solution, but sometimes as humans we must do it. So the 21st century history playlist is growing, unfortunately, for sort of the pacification of the war. But this is also the mean to that, as a matter of fact. And as I was saying before, I received these questions. I've realized over time that, let's say, there's been, especially in the last year, of course, the YouTube environment has really changed a lot. But considering that I started different series, I started discussing contemporary warfare, etc., I sometimes have the idea that people have stopped caring about the sort of more straightforward history content for this kind of updates and or let's hear what Schwerpunkt says. So I've never really presented myself as a contemporary strategic analyst. First of all, because I don't do that for a living, and that would be sort of enough. It is true that I've been looking at certain theaters, in particular Ukraine. We discussed something else here and there about more recent events. And of course, given my background, I could expand further on this stuff with some profit overall. I'm not a complete ignoramus on the subject, or so it seems. Here the F-35 was a matter of heart, sentimental relation with the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II and other planes. The only truth, given that, I believe it or not, but as I hinted at, not just the beginning of this video, but also in others, I have actually a particular interest in aerial warfare that I haven't, as you've seen here, not even ever sort of let out for some reason. My topics choice in Schwerpunkt has always been regimented in a much broader frame. It was a much more robust one. So you would be surprised by how many things I actually got interested in also at some point in the past, and I haven't discussed. Right here, you can argue that not even the things I actually fully specialize in are a prominent sort of theme in the channel. Right, I think people can realize more or less what the times and places that I stick to the most, but it's just attained where at least I come to explain them better than the rest, right? But I try to vary a lot, not much for much of a YouTube visibility strategy. It is because I think that for the purpose of explaining certain things that matter in history, in warfare, in politics, you have to pass through a labyrinthic path that I think YouTube, my YouTube channel with thousands of videos at this point somehow starts to be fairly well represented, if anything, in relative terms compared to other channels. And that, however, I think escapes most followers' realization. I understand that there are sort of new followers that have discovered the channel in the moment, but I still get strange questions like, I don't know, today I had, a comment on that video about 15th century, what was it, households, guard units and all the stuff like that, and this guy came on the video and said, I like the video, it seems to do a lot. I had come here, actually in the inverted way, first said, I came here because I thought I would learn about how medieval armies were levied and whatever. And instead, you talk only just, about, you don't talk much about that at all. Meaning that he thought it was this general introduction of how medieval armies were levied. But you seem to know a lot about medieval warfare. So do you have other videos, or do you have any, historiographical suggestion? And these are the moments which I appreciate the enthusiasm, I appreciate the curiosity. I have nothing against these followers, but the question is, why don't you search? I mean, it's very easy to search on a YouTube channel. There's a very specific search function. And I get the impression that I've made so much that people, this is completely normal. I've seen it in other contexts online in the past also with other people. Like, they don't know what you've done. And at this point, what I've done on YouTube starts being fairly relevant, I would say, even though, again, my reach is limited. But say in absolute terms, what I've done is something that you could profitably exploit. And in fact, this is my main concern. Like, I understand that people want to know more about current facts, and I'm, again, flattered, so to say, that you want to know my opinion about certain things like, again, Ukraine, Iran, and so on. However, the point is, and this has always and truly been almost the only point that I've ever made on Schwerpunkt, at least in a prescriptive sense, that is, if you don't watch the rest of the content, or if you sort of say, okay, well, but I don't know what it is, and so I understand the divide, the barrier. This always happens when you're not familiar with a topic. It always seems exotic and strange, and you tend not to be attracted to it. But the question is exactly the same. Like, if you evaluate my opinion, my knowledge, my take on certain topics, the question is, don't you think that if you're interested in that, you may get some of that yourself if you look at the wall architecture of my channel? Because at this point, I seriously start to think about this, like, in thousands of videos, each lasting 1 to 2 hours, at this level of depth and sort of general topics range, etc. It's something that you would pay a fortune were you to access this through sort of conventional education, had you to privately pay for it, for example, and it's out here for free, right? I estimate greatly people who support me also financially for what I do, both here and on Patreon. But I think the greatest support in absolute terms is sharing, right? And I know that sharing costs in that same term, but I mean, the greater challenge here is visibility, right? And it's always going to be a problem in a way. I don't know how YouTube is gonna evolve or devolve, involve as a platform in the future, etc. But we've seen a bit of a, not necessarily an apocalypse last year, but lots of creators have been quitting. If I'm not wrong, very big channels in military history sort of said this is not work anymore. So the question is, at this point in Schwerpunkt's history, we have tens of thousands of subscribers that are also more or less active, in the sense that, of course, the wide majority does not regularly watch. My God, this is completely normal. But I mean, if somebody does not use the account, it's deactivated, right? So people that are, I don't know, people that have passed away, whatever, if they don't use the channel, it deactivates and it automatically unsubscribes. So all people who subscribe to my content are active people who I wish to remain active, if anything. And perfectly okay, by the way, with people who unsubscribe just by will, because if you don't like my content, you don't think my channel is your cup of tea, it's perfectly fine for you to be out of here. I prefer to have like less subscribers, followers in general, than sort of people who expect something that I'm not going to deliver, whichever it is, or if they disagree with me, if they can't stand me, whatever. So I noticed that there is an increased support in general by this broader loyal core, but at the same time, I wonder, like, we are at 30,000 right now. It's not a huge number. It's sort of pretty small, modest for the ambitions, especially of this channel in particular. This is the moment in which the difference will allow us to step up. I think that there are certain mechanics that are happening on YouTube. There are, for example, lots of new, let's leave aside AI's law that YouTube is somehow fixing in a way, and instead degenerate policies they have enacted with shorts and all visibility and so on. But it seems to me there's a great period of change overall. And we are one of the few channels that has remained consistent to itself over the years, has this enormous baggage, treasure, And this is going to go on, right? Unlike, because my point, my objective, so to say, is very different from other channels' objectives. Like other channels aim at for visibility according to YouTube's algorithmic mechanisms, right? Because that's the sort of trick. I can't say the cheat. If people are interested, they're gonna watch. I think that generally speaking, visibility does depend on the audience interest, but there is always a potential that can be unlocked, like even a minimal effort in sharing, in sort of overall supporting, like whatever. The most important is, again, visibility. Can make a big difference, right? And so we can affirm ourselves as something more. And so, by the way, that is what is going to make my channels more likely to continue to produce in a certain way that is the one that you are requesting, right? The point is that I've never really made videos at request. Here and there, yes, maybe questions and answer. I also address certain topics that in any case are going to be discussed anyway. Most of the times I don't really have requests in mind sometimes, but I'm not going to bend the channel simply to that request or to requests in general. I mean, because again, I follow a different path that is often unseen behind this all. But there is an overall strategy to this all, and this is not really sort of that visible. Again, I understand that you want more contemporary history stuff, at least very contemporary today's events. With Iran, frankly, it's always like war. We have seen this in many circumstances, is unpredictable. Not much because of military issues, but because of political issues, right? So for me to make, for example, a video now, a couple of days after it's not so interesting to me. Like I keep myself informed, etc. But also with Ukraine, it took 3 years for me to start a series, but not because or rather that was for completely different reasons in general. But let's say unless something enormous happens, or at least something that can be profitably explained for some reason, which hasn't quite happened, telling the truth, I don't need to update just the day after. All right. I made something on Operation Spiderweb, for example, last spring. That was interesting. And, it fits a broader pattern, right? A broader narrative. But with Iran, frankly, I'm satisfied in general by the sort of immediacy of what happened, whatever. Then the broader ramifications are something we will have to live and see, right? Given that that's more or less true for any other circumstance, especially with this scale. So I'm not sort of making any sort of, I'm not being nor optimistic nor pessimistic. I'm just, again, have my standards, my method, and in general, I don't, what you've seen also in the videos about Ukraine mostly is that I invite people to calm down. I know that, especially if you're younger, things like these hype you in a way, and you want, oh my God, you want to know what the expert says or whatever. Not necessarily my case here. But that aesthetics, that adrenaline rush aside, my content making is mostly aimed at making people calm down, to cool off, and evaluate things for what they are in general. I've had actually very sort of dear followers, people who sent me gifts, etc., that said, for example, I disagree with you with Trump, about Trump, and what he did. My point is, yes, is political in a sense, but my interest is immediately on the channel military, right? And when I make strategic analysis, my first point is, whatever happens, like we've seen it also with Russia, I have a radical pro-Ukraine bias, definitely for different political, historical, cultural reasons and more, telling the truth. But you're not going to find on my channel something like, I don't know, downstating, Russian force if it is not true, or vice versa for that matter. Same goes for Ukraine or any other player. So to me, the same eventually, when as a Clausewitzian you look at war as a political instrument and necessarily brings you to some political analysis, opinion, sort of overview, functions the same way. I think that especially what happened in the last years, and for anyone who has also lived on social media and all this kind of stuff, at least has been following on social media all these events, again, so loaded in the last sort of, at this point, several years de facto, you should be completely habituated, I think, to that emotional issues, to that kind of rush. Oh my God, now this thing, everybody is talking about it, the internet is exploding because of it. And then, I don't know, 1 week later, nobody even still thinks about this anymore, right? And this is incredibly educational, from also in terms of broader historical analysis, because from one side, it makes you really feel what, say, also by general comparison, what could have been also in other times in history, and how much even this general sentiments will have sort of influenced the system. They're much difficult to interpret, of course, if you're historically, but sometimes also in everyday life overall insulated from them, right? Social media has, however, habituated us in part more to this, to look at sort of the unthinkable from the distance and say, well, okay, I'm fine that I'm here, that I'm fine. But that's exactly the point. Like, there is also an advantage in this, that you should be able to sort of realize that for how antipathetic a certain player is, you should always draw a picture to make an assessment regarding sort of what realistically this thing is all about, right? And politics, again, is very complicated, right? I don't know. To me, for example, I realize as a European, as I said it many times, that here in Europe, we don't get practically anything about actual American politics, right? We are obviously in the best position to access any social media platform that talks about it, to inform ourselves. Like, we're not scarce of it, but people in general do not really care. It's like the meme, Americans don't even care about what Europeans think. And this sort of liberal flavored wave, for example, of anti-Trumpism, etc., like, it is from one side, it's not just liberal for that matter. There are hardcore defenders, for example, of Ukraine, of far right wingers, whatever, the whole extreme on the other side, that of the many sides, as you understand, because here the message passed, according to at least some propaganda, that supporting Ukraine would be something leftistic. By the way, we'll have also to talk about this, because I want to make a video about Russian propaganda, as a matter of fact. But the point is that we are really not getting the actual information about day-to-day sort of American life from the European side. Politically speaking, we don't know how government works, which kind of primary figures speak, whatever. At least many Europeans probably do, but there are very few overall, right? And it's true also, again, for Europe about Americans, those who think that we live in a totalitarian regime, that you get arrested because of tweets or whatever, or this kind of stuff. But, and you see, this, for example, is a talking point that attributionally, according to those movements, like a leftist would say, and I say it from a beyond ultra-right-wing perspective, and they don't really get it, because there is no objectivity in the assessment. So aside from whoever says whom, I think that the most, say, clever thing that you can do is to realize that, especially in this kind of analysis, there is a path, right? There is a sort of initiatory mechanism that allows you to autonomously, but also objectively and accurately evaluate certain situations. And it actually takes time. Like, you have to dedicate yourself to it. I personally never really got it in my entire life, any rush from supporting one side. At least when I was younger, yes, of course, in general, I was more extremistic, more at least, you can't even say extremistic, because it's not about it's about the intensity of the feeling, right? In a instinctive sense, rather than sort of some deeper, more granitic, courageous belief that you build over time, and so on. But I mean, the the big step for me is not just, of course, that I always studied history basically in my adulthood and before even, and I was always interested in learning things, right? I see the majority of you is between 25, 34, at least in relative terms, not the absolute majority, but the most active chunk predictably, right? I'm still within that age range myself. And I can tell you that probably also that's the silent majority that follows me that have started to successfully consolidate their prefrontal cortex. But there is a set of instruments that you can't gain. This is what I mean, that you can't gain, for example, also through watching my channel, that for strategic analysis cannot separate from the study of all history. In fact, here you have an enormous advantage for what I do, because it's not just my background that does certain things, by sort of professionally, but I'm one of those, I can't say emerging strategic analysts, but let's say people that talk basically that same level in the social media space, that is not, say, I don't know, a politologist or a self-made expert in the art of war. At least, if you are a proper military historian writing, I don't know, a doctorate on it, it's something very sort of life-changing for your own analysis capacities on that particular subject, right? And there are many people that approach this analysis, but without that military historical, but even art of war specialistic background. And so you have all these strategic centers of people to talk about geopolitics that does not exist, by the way. And I'm preparing a video about that too, for that matter, that want to tell you essentially their political opinion, but without being necessarily able to assess the broader military situation, also in a theoretical framework. I know military men that know their deal and say interesting things, and I inform myself from that. But you realize that even from their general background, they don't all necessarily have, for example, a Clausewitzian backbone. They haven't really studied much also historically. They think they know something because, again, they studied something about military history at some point, but not as long or as sort of deeply in a way that so habitually. And so obviously they had something else to do. They had to mostly train, because if we look at our military at large, at least they are not particularly involved in actual warfare. But and this is completely normal again, but that's why when military history serves unavoidable, right, properly ineliminable tool for a proper art of war expertise that eventually has to be applied in the actual field on the basis of course, also military training. And at that point, military experience surpasses everything in actual eventual sort of capacity to command to begin with, especially we're talking the higher levels in any meaningfully strategic sense. And so these topics are relatively difficult to approach until you actually see the histories as well. And that's why I say all those videos that I make are not random videos. They're not chosen because, I don't know, today I just want to talk about Longobarд warfare for 20 years of history for no reason. If you really want to understand 2026, you have to study that too. For how relatively odd this may seem, there is always the video about the Longobards even made its fair share of views. But I mean, let me check with what are the videos that are sort of the least watched in general. Here, the one about the Victorian army. Actually, that was pretty interesting, and it was even shared elsewhere. People need time sometimes to appreciate. I realize that many of you are tied mostly to the eras that I discuss in sort of demographics, so to say, that because the exact proportion of eras that I discussed is represented in the requests about what I should talk more about, because they are evidently people who have that monothematic approach to, I don't know, they are here only for ancient history, medieval history. That's not a good thing, let me tell you. It's not because I make my videos. I could make, I don't know, 1/10 of the videos and still say the same thing, because the again, you cannot understand even properly another era if you don't study all of them. And again, consider yourself, if anything, lucky that you find someone that had the opportunity, and quite rare, in fact, chance to do so for a living and to continue to do so, and also from such a relatively early age, as a matter of fact. So I make these videos also with this sort of lasting reflection moral. So this is also to make the video longer, because I want it to be, in any case, longer than 1 hour. If I can, Clausewitzingly speaking, give that insight on the matter, just know that I'm more than glad to do so in general. So again, I think that this is important for our general debate about this. I'm going to continue, again, making what I'm doing here, covering similar topics. We will also talk much more about aerial warfare. Right? I created a playlist, telling the truth, already, and for example, the Battle of Midway. This summer I made an introduction, very scarce views. The British raid on Taranto of 1940. Very scarce views, right? You can't go like this. These are some of the most important aeronaval operations in World War II. They must be learned, right? There's no way around that. It's important to do so from, obviously, the standpoint that I, generally speaking, provided. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.